Main event of the evening.
These days are
Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today we will be talking about Season 6, Episode 8, Fearless Malph.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Fearless Malph.
We open with a crowd of teens dancing at Arnold's as Al brings Richie a sundae.
a double quadruple scoop Alfredo Deluxo.
The payphone rings for Richie. It's his higher up at the college newspaper, letting Richie know that they're killing his first story as science editor. Fruit fly, friend or foe. A depressed Richie goes into the bathroom without eating his sundae. He's joined by Fonzie, who has a story for him. He just broke a record at Inspiration Point by going down the side with 3 girls on one bike.
You see, I figured I've already got Miller's Road, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to go down the other side of Inspiration Point.
Fonz, the other side.
Sadly, Richie can't publish it because it has nothing to do with science. Hearing Fonzie talk about fear, however, gives Richie an idea. After all, everyone's afraid of something, right?
I pretend you didn't say that.
That night at the Cunningham house, Richie tells his family his idea for his story over dinner, fears and phobias. Joni suggests Richie talk about his fear of flowers. Richie protests that he's not afraid of flowers.
Only of smelling them since that bumblebee incident.
Then he makes fun of Joni being afraid of the boogeyman. Howard mentions that Marion is afraid of strange bathrooms, and Marion adds that Howard is afraid of worms. As the Cunninghams begin to argue, Richie calls up his professor to say he thinks he's onto something. The next day at Arnold's, Richie is going over a list of fears with Potsy and Ralph. Ralph has answered yes to every single one.
Acrophobia. Height.
Nope. Yes.
Phobophobia. Fear of fear.
Nope. Yes.
Richie's article is going well. He's got the who, what, when, and where, but not the why. Potsy offers to introduce him to someone down at the psychology department. He's a custodian, but only because he doesn't have U.S. credentials. He has multiple degrees. He takes care of the lab animals. Richie likes the idea, but Ralph, who is afraid of mice, is less enthused. The 3 of them meet with Professor Himmel at the lab. Psychology of fear is his specialty, and Professor Himmel says,
We need some fears to keep us in balance.
Richie asks what happens if someone has too many fears, and everyone looks at Ralph, who is terrified of the caged mice.
Do your mice pick locks?
Professor Himmel says he's been experimenting with hypnosis to remove fears, and is about to demonstrate with one of the mice when every mouse in the cage begins moving agitatedly. As Richie observes, they look like they're dancing. Himmel says that all animals are sensitive to coming disasters. Dogs and cats howl before an earthquake.
You all know the stories of rats leaving a ship before it sinks.
And dancing mice means that, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a tornado is coming. Ralph is terrified. Richie is skeptical, and Professor Himmel points out the reading on the barometer and the dark clouds coming over the horizon. As Ralph fearfully clings to the professor and then the table, Professor Himmel decides to calm the collegiate coward down with hypnotism. Despite Ralph's assertion that his will is too strong, Himmel is able to hypnotize him, and Potsy by accident, with just a clap of his hands.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Himmel snaps Potsy out of it, then tells Ralph that when he awakens, he won't be afraid of tornadoes. In fact, he won't be afraid of anything. Awake. Ralph says he feels different, courageous, fearless, strong. He tries to move Himmel out of his way.
Out of my way, Doc!
Only to realize he's not that strong before the trio leave the lab to warn everyone about the tornado.
It's a twister! It's a twister!
Howard and Marion come home from grocery shopping. Howard is annoyed that a loaf of bread costs 22 cents. Marion blames the Russians.
It's the Russians. Ever since that dog in space, things haven't been the same.
Richie comes downstairs with all their valuables in a sack. He says he opened all the windows upstairs, and they need to pour some water. Howard initially thinks Richie has lost his mind, until Richie explains that Professor Himmel said there's going to be a tornado. Then Richie mentions the dancing mice, and Howard asks Marion to call the doctor. He doesn't think Richie's well. Ralph and Potsy enter, with Ralph declaring that today is a lovely day for a big wind. Also, he calls Howard Howie.
You got a kite, Howie?
Potsy explains Ralph is hypnotized like the mice. Ralph adds that his family's in the cellar, the sniveling cowards. Potsy's dad just told him to stand outside as a lookout. Richie hugs his parents goodbye, and leaves with Ralph and Potsy to warn everyone at Arnold's and get Joni.
Mom, Dad, what can I say at a time like this?
Howard and Marion continue to be doubtful, until they hear on the radio that there's a tornado warning in their area. Potsy runs into Arnold's and shouts, "Run for your life, a tornado is coming." It's not very effective.
Hey, run for your life, a tornado's coming!
until Richie runs in and shouts the same thing, and everyone clears out. Ralph grabs a random girl and tells her to meet him at Inspiration Point, so they can watch the destruction together. She just screams. Richie gives Joni his car key so she can drive home.
You're giving me your car? Oh, there must be a tornado!
Go!
He and Potsy are about to go warn everyone down at the Pizza Bowl, but Ralph wants to make a few calls in his office first. A few seconds later, Fonzie has been pushed out of the men's room. Richie urges Fonzie to keep in control. Fonzie says he is. He's going to give them a few minutes to call an ambulance and notify Ralph's next of kin. Richie explains Ralph's been hypnotized, but Fonzie isn't swayed until Potsy begs Fonzie not to kill his best friend and roommate. Richie explains about the tornado and the dancing mice, and then Ralph comes out of the bathroom to order Fonzie to clean it and also call him Artie.
That's right, you heard me, Artie. Artie, 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 just shut up. All right.
Then he starts insulting Fonzie's motorcycle.
You've really been bugging me lately. The way you ride that stupid motorcycle.
Richie and Potsy drag him out of the building to get unhypnotized before Ralph can start on Fonzie's jacket. Fonzie goes into the bathroom and hits the wall with such force that the door falls off its hinges and the jukebox starts playing. As Himmel is covering the cages of his mice, Richie, Potsy, and Ralph arrive to tell him he's created a monster.
You've created a monster.
You heard about that?
But they mean Ralph. Himmel is able to unhypnotize him within seconds.
That's fast.
The newly himself, Ralph, upon hearing that it's 6:23, begins to freak out. Richie and Potsy point out that the time has passed and it hasn't shown up yet. But then the skies darken and the winds begin to blow. Richie, Potsy, and the professor duck under the table, but Ralph, panicking, tries to go outside. The door is ripped off its hinges. Richie gets out from under the table to grab Ralph, and he ends up right in the pathway of the falling shelf, and Ralph pushes him out of the way, narrowly avoiding being crushed himself. Richie, amazed, thanks Ralph, and tells him he has courage. Himmel spots the mice doing something with their tails, and the trio of friends leave before they can find out about the next disaster. A week later, the Cunninghams, Ralph, and Potsy are gathered in the Cunninghams' living room, reading Richie's article about how fears are their friends. Then Howard accidentally triggers Ralph's hypnotized state.
And to think all the guy did was just this.
Right as Fonzie comes in, Ralph begins insulting him, and everyone has to hold Fonzie back from attacking him.
Thank you, Peter. That was Fearless Malph, which first aired back on October 24th, 1978. Happy Days was the lead-in that night to the legendary Date with Eraserhead episode of Laverne and Shirley, in which Shirley goes out with a former classmate in order to make Carmine jealous.
Eraserhead! Warren Eraserhead Spiegel from high school!
The one and only.
NBC had a new episode of Grandpa Goes to Washington, in which Grandpa's old friend comes to town and tries to wrangle a political favor. I have to mention that this was followed by a special called Donner Pass, The Road to Survival.
Donner Pass, The Road to Survival.
CBS was airing the 1973 movie Papillon with Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman about one man's attempt to escape from a brutal prison island.
Steve McQueen, Dustin Hoffman, Papillon. The greatest adventure of escape ever filmed.
So of those choices, Peter, what are you watching?
That's a tough one. What are you watching?
I am watching Happy Days. Honestly, the prospect of a mad scientist and a tornado in an episode of Happy Days followed by the Eraserhead thing, I gotta watch that.
Good point.
Fearless Malph was directed by Jerry Paris, and it was written by Walter Kempley. The most recent of Walter's episodes that we covered were Westward Ho, Parts 1 and 2. And as for guest stars this week, we have Leon Askin as Professor Himmel, a very familiar round-faced character actor from Vienna. Leon appeared in numerous films and TV shows from the early 50s to the early 2000s, often typecast as comical villains. He's undoubtedly best known as General Burkhalter on Hogan's Heroes.
You know I was only kidding, don't you?
Of course you were. And I want you to know, I haven't laughed like this in years.
You may have seen Leon in films like Airplane 2, the sequel, The Robe, and Billy Wilder's 1, 2, 3. On TV, he appeared on Three's Company, Different Strokes, Mission Impossible, The Outer Limits, The Monkees, The Adventures of Superman, and many, many more. He returned to his native Vienna near the end of his life, and he appeared there in both cabaret and operatic performances. So, Peter, what on earth did you think of Leon Askin as Professor Himmel?
He was absolutely wonderful. I loved him. The fact that he just shows up in this episode kind of reminds me a lot of when Mork showed up, and it was just like, yeah, aliens are real in Happy Days, and you know this is definitely canon and not just a dream because he's going to get his own spinoff. Professor Himmel does not get his own spinoff, but he is treated as just a person who exists in this world, and I love him for it. And I love how sweet he is with Ingrid, the mouse.
Now, Herman, you let Ingrid eat, yeah?
And I love that apparently he created a monster. And I really want to know more about this monster that he created. Is it a person-shaped monster? Is it somehow connected to his work with lab mice? I have a lot of questions about Professor Himmel, and they will never be answered. But I don't care because I love him.
I loved his performance too. Professor Himmel in no way, shape, or form belongs on a show like Happy Days. And yet there he is, and he is wonderful. Leon Askin just has this great voice and face and presence that he brings to this role. He is hilarious. And yes, he has created a monster, and they barely even touch on that subject.
Well, there's a tornado coming. They have to focus on other stuff.
As for songs this week, it was just replacement music in the first copy of the episode that I found. So I found an alternate version with the original music, which includes Splish Splash by Bobby Darin.
We finally have Splish Splash again. I think we haven't heard it for a really long time.
We also have Hello, Mary Lou by Ricky Nelson and The Twist by Chubby Checker. As for cultural and historical references this week, the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee does have a student newspaper, and it is called The Post, but it was published weekly, not daily, from 1915 to 2012. Since then, it's been online only. I've looked at issues of the UWM Post from the era when Richie would have been attending the school.
Oh, yeah, it's a professor of the UWM Daily Post. Yes, sir, this is Richard Cunningham, the new science editor.
It's a modest 8-page newspaper, and it has no science editor. Aww. Though it does have a society editor, a sports editor, a feature editor, and a city editor, and this does not look like a publication that turns down a lot of stories.
How can they turn down a story with a hook like that? Fruit fly, friend or foe?
Fruit flies pose very little threat to humans, but they do carry diseases and bacteria, so people should wash their fruit thoroughly before eating it. On the bright side, fruit flies eat decaying matter that might cause infections or attract other unwanted pests like rats. So on balance, fruit flies do more good than harm. So I'm going to say Mount Rushmore and President Abraham Lincoln are mentioned again.
Can you visualize this face up on Mount Rushmore right next to Lincoln? You know, he's my favorite.
The South Dakota Monument began construction in 1927 despite protests from the Lakota Sioux, who consider the Black Hills to be sacred territory. Pikes Peak is a mountain in Colorado named after explorer Zebulon Pike. It's part of the Rocky Mountains, and it reaches a height of over 14,000 feet. While Zebulon himself never reached the summit, today there is a tollway that goes to the top and even an annual auto race on Pikes Peak. Fear of flowers is called anthophobia.
You can write about how you're afraid of flowers.
Well, this specific phobia is considered rare. Phobias in general are common. It's estimated that 10% of American adults suffer from strong irrational fears. The fears mentioned in this episode are all real, including phobophobia. Yogi Bear is mentioned.
Just because someone uses a Yogi Bear nightlight does not mean she's afraid of the boogeyman.
Yogi Bear is a talking cartoon bear created by Joseph Barbera and William Hanna, modeled on Art Carney and voiced by Dawes Butler.
I have had it, boo-boo. I'm gonna bust out of here. Every day it's the same old thing. Look at the bears, look at the bears, look at the bears. Sheesh.
Yogi debuted in 1958 as a supporting character on the Huckleberry Hound show, but he was so popular that he got a show of his own in 1961. Since then, he's had countless TV shows and comic books, plus 2 feature films and a boatload of merchandise. And yes, there have been numerous Yogi Bear nightlights going back to the 1960s. Another King Kong reference this week. Did you know that Kong has appeared in at least 12 movies so far, both live action and animated, including 2 Japanese films from the 1930s that are now lost?
Oh, wow. I did not know that.
And again, that is the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, filling in for the University of Wisconsin in the establishing shots in this episode. Okay, this is a question that the episode raises. Can hypnosis help people deal with phobic disorders? A massive study in 2016 stated that more studies were needed. The evidence that we have now is anecdotal. For example, there are people who have tried it with successful results. And in case you were wondering, yes, animals can be hypnotized, though I couldn't determine if mice can be hypnotized. I will give you one guess at this, Peter. Of all the animals in the animal kingdom, what is the easiest animal to hypnotize?
Parrots.
You are so close. Give it one more guess.
Pigeons?
Chickens.
Ah!
Similarly, science has not reached a definite conclusion as to whether animals can predict the weather. What is known is that animals react to changes in the level of humidity in the air and to changes in atmospheric pressure. Potsy mentions Disneyland.
This happened to me only once before in my lifetime.
Oh, you've been to Disneyland?
The Anaheim amusement park opened on July 17, 1955, to much fanfare. Mickey and Minnie Mouse have been walk-around characters since opening day, though the earliest costumes were borrowed from a 1950 Ice Capades show.
Huh.
Opening day Mickey and Minnie were pretty underwhelming for that reason. Richie says that Milwaukee hasn't had a tornado since Truman left office.
We haven't had a tornado in Milwaukee since Truman left office.
That was in 1953, so about 7 years before this story is taking place. Milwaukee actually experienced a tornado in August of 1958. It killed 2 people and injured 11 more. There had previously been a tornado in January of 1927.
A trained scientific mind refuses to accept one fact unless additional facts can back it up. Check the barometer.
A barometer measures atmospheric pressure. Generally, it's good when the barometer rises and bad when it falls. A normal reading is 30, and yes, 28 would be abnormally low and a sign of bad weather to come. Howard complains about paying 22 cents for a loaf of bread. That's totally normal for 1960, and it's about $2 in today's money, which is about right.
Also, Marion is apparently xenophobic against Russians.
Marion mentions the Russians launching a dog into space. This refers to Laika, a stray dog who in November 1957 became the first animal to orbit the Earth. The news of Laika's flight came only weeks after the launch of Sputnik, and it rattled America's confidence in its own space program.
October 4th, 1957. The space age begins. Sputnik shocks a complacent America.
Within a month, Russia was ready with Sputnik 2. This time, it carried a passenger, Laika, the dog.
The first living creature to reach space.
Tragically, Laika survived mere hours in space. At the time, Russian officials claimed she lasted several days.
Oh, God.
Despite what this episode tells you, it is both dangerous and a waste of time to open windows during a tornado. Absolutely do not do it. It is an old wives' tale that has long since been disproven. Fonzie refers to Ralph as a kamikaze.
The second thought, I'm going to go in there, I'm going to stuff that kamikaze kid right down the drain.
The term literally means divine wind in Japanese, but historically it refers to Japanese fighter pilots during World War II who flew suicide missions to destroy warships. These kamikaze techniques didn't actually start until October 1944, when things were already looking pretty bleak for the Japanese. Professor Himmel says that Ralph will no longer be
brave, courageous, and bold.
He's quoting the theme song to the TV Western The Life and Legend of Wyatt Earp, starring Hugh O'Brien.
Wyatt Earp, Wyatt Earp, brave, courageous, and bold.
Professor Himmel also says,
missed by that much.
This is a reference to the catchphrase,
missed it by that much,
from the 1960s TV spy comedy Get Smart, starring Don Adams. Unbelievably, Leon Askin never appeared on Get Smart.
He would have been great as like a mad scientist of the episode.
Ralph makes references to The Land of Oz and Auntie M. Both of these things debuted in the 1900 children's book The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. And Happy Days seemed to have tracked down a real student newspaper for that final scene, but it's not the UWM Post. The section of the newspaper we see is called the Home Forum, and the headline reads, The Adventures of One Monkey. Other observations this week. Has Joni ever expressed a fear of the boogeyman even once?
Nope. I guess it just never came up.
This is a Ralph Malph episode, but Ralph doesn't even appear until the 9-minute mark. Maybe they realized even in a Ralph Malph episode, they have to be sparing with Ralph. They can't have him like on from the first scene. Otherwise, that's too much Ralph for one episode.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird Ralph episode because I guess he kind of has an arc where despite the fact that he's a coward, he still saves Richie from getting crushed. But I'm not sure that that was really a conflict for him. Yes, he's a coward, but he didn't really want to change that. He didn't really learn anything about himself that he needed to learn. And I guess it's nice that we know that he cares enough about Richie to save him.
I think that's the point here, is that it tests Ralph's underlying strength of character. When push comes to shove in an emergency, Ralph can be counted on to actually be useful.
Not just stand there and watch his friend get crushed to death.
I am 90% sure that the radio announcer we hear is Jerry Paris.
And now for tomorrow's weather. Fair and sunny through the end of the week.
Well, that's a relief.
Wait, I've just been handed a bulletin.
Patsy mentions the pizza bowl. So this tornado must be affecting the characters on Laverne and Shirley as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is the one time when the girls' basement apartment would be a real advantage.
Yeah. It does make me wonder if this means that Richie and Patsy and everyone are hanging out with Laverne and Shirley just off screen. If they know enough about Laverne and Shirley to know that they hang out at the pizza bowl?
They must. I thought that there was a missed opportunity that Laverne and Shirley should have also done a tornado episode right after this one. So there could have been Tornado Tuesday on ABC, and both of the shows deal with it. Speaking of that tornado, though, I'm very surprised that the Cunningham's porch swing survived the tornado so easily.
That's nice, I guess.
You'd also think that there would be like leaves and branches strewn everywhere. Maybe this is long enough afterwards that there's been a cleanup. So, Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions this week?
Marian is wearing a sweater over her shoulders, but not with her arms through it. And as I mentioned before, in kid stuff, when Peggy was wearing one, I just really like that look. It's very preppy and very stylish.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question, was this episode any good?
It was okay, kind of inconsequential, but it was genuinely funny in some parts, and I absolutely loved Professor Himmel. So, yeah, this episode is all right.
I will say that I enjoyed this episode a lot. Overall, I have a higher tolerance level for Ralph Malph than you might.
Well, it depends. I feel like he could have been better utilized in this episode, and I do find it kind of funny that the ultimate thesis statement of this episode is that if Ralph Malph is not a coward, then he is absolutely insufferable.
Well, that was one of the things that I loved about this episode was the overconfident Ralph Malph who feels nervy enough to insult the Fonz repeatedly to his face.
Also, his idea of a fun date is to watch a tornado destroy Milwaukee.
Well, there are people who go chasing after storms.
That is true. I just think it's a weird date activity.
I just liked what this episode does to Ralph and how that affects Fonzie. I love Fonzie trying to keep his anger in check and trying to take out his frustration anywhere else instead of just wailing on Ralph, which is what he wants to do.
Also, I kind of liked that felt like a callback to A Mind of His Own when Ridgey was trying to help Fonzie not have anger management issues.
That is something that Fonzie has been working on, keeping his anger and emotions in check. And I love that this episode puts that to the test. I just love the fact that there's a tornado that comes through the town and that there's a mad scientist. I was just thinking about how many crazy turns season 6 has already taken. We had a Western 3-parter, then we had 3 serious episodes, then we had 1 normal episode about Joni's Sweet 16, and now we have this thing? What is this show anymore? I don't know.
We're kind of slowly losing the thread of 50s nostalgia and going for just whatever.
Just whatever is the theme of season 6. Whatever you want, whatever you think would be a story, it's a story. And that's what I love about Fearless Malph, is that this is just a crazy, almost surreal story that doesn't seem to belong in Happy Days. Why are they doing it? There's no real reason, but there it is. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the things that we are doing?
Listeners can follow us on Twitter at Fonzie Podcast. They can follow me on Twitter at Peter Volfranc. That's PeterVulfranc.
And they can follow me on Twitter at Joe_A_Blevins. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com. And they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket for next week?
Next week, Al gets cursed in The Evil Eye.
Of all the episodes of Happy Days, this is one that I really remember from my childhood. So I'm very much looking forward to talking about it. And see you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Your Majesty, if you were king, you wouldn't be afraid of anything?
Not nobody. Not no-how. Not even a rhinoceros? Impossible.
How about a hippopotamus?
Why, I'd thrash him from top to bottomless.
Supposing you met an elephant?
I'd wrap him up in cellophane. What if it were a brontosaurus? I'd show him who was king of the forest. How? How? Courage. What makes a king out of a slave? Courage. What makes the flag on the mast to wave? Courage. What makes the elephant charge his tusk in the misty mist or the dusky dusk? What makes the muskrat guard his musk? Courage. What makes the Sphinx the seventh wonder? Courage. What makes the dawn come up like thunder? Courage. What makes the Hottentot so hot? What puts the ape in apricot? What have they got that I ain't got? Courage. You could say that again.
This happened to me only once before in my lifetime.